Hello, and thank you for tuning in. Today we are going to talk about Partus Sequitur Ventrem, which is a legal doctrine that the European or the so-called white man used against the so-called black woman or the African woman. It allowed him to rape her during slavery, get her pregnant. Then after she has the child, he can sell it for a profit or enslave it and make the child work once it's grown up old enough to work for a profit. According to the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, the reason they did this was to make their wicked lust both profitable and pleasurable. This makes the European or the so-called white man in the United States the ultimate deadbeat dad, sex trafficker, and slave trader. So, we're going to look at the quick definition here and then we're going to read the legal doctrine more in depth, right? It says here, that which is born follows the womb. Also, Partus was a legal doctrine passed in colonial Virginia in 1662 and other English crown colonies in the Americas, which defined the legal status of children born there. The doctrine mandated that children of slave mothers would inherit the legal status of their mothers. So let's dig deeper into it. I'll zoom in a little bit. All right, so hopefully that is large enough where you can see it. It says, looks like the author is Jennifer L. Morgan, right? So, Partus Sequitur Ventrem, Law, Race, and Reproduction in Colonial Slavery. Whereas some doubts have arisen whether children got by any Englishman upon a Negro woman shall be slave or free, be it therefore enacted and declared by this present Grand Assembly that all children born in this country shall be held bond or free only according to the condition of the mother, Partus Sequitur Ventrem, and that if any Christian shall commit fornication with a Negro man or woman, he or she so offending shall pay double the fines imposed by the former act. Laws of Virginia, 1662, Act 12, Latin added by William Hennig, the Statutes at Large, 1819. 1. Atlantic slavery rested upon a notion of heritability. It thus relied on a reproductive logic that was inseparable from the explanatory power of race. As a result, women and their experiences of enslavement shed critical light on what it meant to be enslaved or free in the early modern Atlantic world, regardless of the rate of reproduction among the enslaved, which remained low in all early American slave societies. So understand that. So the rate of reproduction among the enslaved, it meaning Negro women getting pregnant by Negro men, that remained low in all early American slave societies. The ideological solidity of those slave societies needed reproducing women. Building a system of racial slavery on the notion of heritability did not require the presence of natural population growth among the enslaved, but it did require a clear understanding that enslaved women gave birth to enslaved children. I need y'all to understand what we're reading here. For them to build a system of racial slavery on the notion of heritability, it didn't require the presence of natural population growth. They didn't need the Negro man, the so-called black man, to have sex with his own woman and get her pregnant. They just needed a clear understanding that enslaved women gave birth to enslaved children. In other words, they needed to be able to rape our women and produce more slaves, whether we got them pregnant or not. So, for all of you so-called black women that love to call the so-called black man a deadbeat, make sure you call these founding fathers of the United States who enslaved you and I, and our forefathers and foremothers, make sure you call them deadbeats and stop giving them honor. And make sure that if you find out they are in any of your lineage, that you ask why they didn't pass down the wealth or inheritance due you, right? If they didn't pass that down to you, it means they were deadbeats, and that's why you're still poor, right? So we're going to get this right today. We're going to place the blame where it goes. The so-called black man and woman must stop fighting each other and put the blame where it belongs. Let's continue. Resituating heritability was key in the practice of an enslavement that systematically alienated the enslaved from their kin and their lineage. Enslaved people had to be understood as dispossessed, outside of the normal networks of family and community, to justify the practice of mass enslavement. Understand, they are alienating us from our families today by making the so-called black man and woman fight each other in court, in the street, in the home, right? Being at each other's throats, fatherless homes. You running the fathers away, or he runs away, or he's dead, or in jail, or you on drugs, whatever the case may be. This is by design, and it began here. Let's continue. As this essay will argue, enslaved women's maternal possibilities became a crucial vehicle by which racial meaning was concretized. You understand? They want to solidify, make it like concrete, like stone, the racial meaning. And it did so long before legislators indexed such possibilities into law. So before this law even existed, they were already practicing this wickedness. Understand that. That's why they made it a law. But some of you dummies think God wants you to obey the law of the land. No, God wants you to obey his law, meaning righteousness, because the laws of this land have been wicked as hell throughout history. Right? You obey the law of the land when it's righteous. Let's continue. Further, by centering the women whose reproductive lives were at issue, I argue that enslaved people best understood the theory and praxis of racial slavery, the violence done when economic structures supersede kinship. It means when their desire to make money, make finance, and grow their economy is more important or supersedes your kinship, your family. Their money is more important than the so-called black man and woman's family. That's what they're saying here. And when enslavability displaces maternity, is long-standing. Look at that. They're more concerned about keeping the black woman a slave than her being a mother. That's what they're saying. There are moments when recognition of that agony of dispossession becomes clear. So rather than an inquiry into legal history, here I argue that in the 16th and 17th century English Atlantic world, women navigated the dawning recognition that their reproductive lives would be the evidence of racialized dispossession. Stay with me, because I'm going to be reading this for a while. We're going in today. Put your legal thought and scholarly caps on. We got to learn to read some things that might sound dry so that we can understand the depths of the evil in this European so-called white man's systemically racist law. Just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. So a lot of you think that because you can do something legally to your man in court about his child, you think it's okay. I want you to know this is what they think of you, so-called black woman. Your child has always been for their economic well-being. They don't give a damn if your son grows up to be a cutthroat killer or thug. They just want to separate him from the father, make you think you're getting welfare, Section 8, child support, EBT, whatever you think you're getting, and you're going to raise up another monster or a dummy who will be worthless in society. This is their plan. So humble yourself to your man instead of to the European, and you might be able to save your family. Argue with this and keep hating and thinking somebody trying to make excuses, then get ready for your son's funeral or your nephew's funeral or your male cousin's funeral or your little brother's funeral. You understand? You're going to keep going to black boys and black young men's funerals. If we don't understand that this system is meant first and foremost to kill and genocide the black man, then after that, they got the black woman and child in their hand and in their pocket. Understand that. Now let's continue. And this is a message of love. This is not trying to bash the sisters, because the system is working on you too. What I'm saying is the black man and woman have been victimized by this system. Plain and simple. If you don't believe that, you better listen to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. May she rest in peace. You understand? And look up how she defines the system of white supremacy. They are afraid of our genetically annihilating them. because they know that black is the dominant gene. And they're afraid that the so-called black man is going to get with Becky, Amber, Rebecca, and everybody else and produce a bunch of black babies and wipe them out of existence. That is why they were okay with raping our women, but they don't want us to touch theirs. I'm telling y'all, it's the same thing today. Nothing has changed. It's slavery by another name. Now let's continue. Enslaved mothers were enmeshed in the foundational meta-languages of early modern Atlantic ideas of slavery, freedom, and racial colonialism. From the first founding of English settlements in the Caribbean to the slow unfolding of racial slavery in Virginia, early modern slave owners presumed that enslaved women's reproductive labor accompanied their manual labor in tobacco and sugar fields, mobilizing the language of increase. Keep that in mind, right, as an economic increase. As I have shown in my earlier work, was part and parcel of how nascent slave owners, right, shaped their newly racialized present and future. I return here to questions of race and maternity to interrogate the importance of the Virginia Slave Code in crafting racial inheritance through enslaved women throughout the Atlantic world. The connection between the English Caribbean and the southern colonies of North America is starkly illustrated in the symmetry of Barbados's and Virginia's 17th century slave codes, built on the foundations of English legal traditions concerning the regulation of vagabonds and so-called masterless men. Let's see here. Let me skip on down a little bit. I'm not going to make y'all listen to every single line, but we will go into this. Let's see. We're going to try to read the main points, okay? While the provenance of the Partus Code is important, my interest here is to link that legal history to the quotidian experience of racialized reproduction for enslaved women, and from there to explore the implication of such experience on how we conceptualize the history of slavery. In other words, this document that we're reading is to help us get a clear view of the experience of the so-called black woman or Negro woman during slavery and this European man's intention for passing this law and any others like it. Well before 1662, both enslaved and free black women grappled immediately with the dangers attendant to racial inheritance. So I want you to know that even when the black woman was free, she still was in danger when it came to racial inheritance. The Virginia Act is both a window onto the reproductive logics of slavery and a crucial fulcrum. In other words, a pivotal point with which to explore the materiality of the race reproduction bind for enslaved women. Race reproduction bind. Just think about that. Your race and reproduction binds you to something, which was slavery. The Virginia colony has long been a productive site for studies of early modern racial formations. Here the transition to slavery was slow, and free black men and women gained some autonomy or independence and maneuverability over the course of the first 50 years of colonial settlement. An emphasis on the fluidity of early racial thought is crucial to the arsenal for dislodging racist inevitability, and thus it is not surprising to see it play a central role in scholarship in the origins of racial thinking. All right, let's see. Let me skip on down. I don't want to make y'all suffer too much through this here. I want to get the meat out of it, though. Let's see here. Here we go. With the this paragraph here. With the passage of the 1662 Act, legislators made the connection between heredity and race explicit, meaning they made it clear, right? But the ruling did more than simply inscribe notions of heritable descent into law. It actually subverted them. Their legal intervention reassured English slave-owning settlers. Here we go. These Englishmen, look, slave-owning settlers, they want reassurance. Look at that. That in the matter of enslaved people, status passed down not through the father, but through the mother. Partus Sequitur Ventrem, or literally offspring follows belly. Now I want you and I to think about that. Understand this. Their legal intervention, that means just because you go to court and get something done does not mean it's righteous, fair, equitable, just, none of that. They went through the court to do the work of the devil because that's who they were, that's who they are. Because their sons and grandsons and great-grandsons and nephews, you understand, they have passed this filth down. Because Dr. Joy DeGruy mentioned a survey or a poll where they asked a certain number of European or Caucasian men that if they could rape a woman and not face any consequences such as jail time or punishment, would they still consider raping women? And according to their survey, 70% of them said yes, meaning 69 plus 1%, 70%. In other words, they still would like to be able to rape you and get away with it, so-called black woman. And yes, some of them would rape their own women too. But they used to be able to rape you legally and then enslave your child. And you have the nerve to turn to them in the legal system for help against your man when both the black man and black woman were subjugated by these devils. So, the legal intervention reassured English slave-owning settlers that in the matter of enslaved people, meaning the Negro man and woman, status passed down not through the father but through the mother. In other words, they took the power from the father and gave it to the mother. You know why they did that? Because when you give the power through the mother, through your wicked legal system, that's how you enslave a people. You can't rape a man and make him have a child. Talk to me. But you can rape a woman and force her to have a child in slavery. So for you so-called black women that think you have power because you can take your man to court, they gave you that power so that you could destroy your family, just like they did to you right here. So that means we need to wake the hell up and stop fighting each other. Show some humility to that man like you go to the court praying and begging for their help, right? Because that's what you're doing. Let's continue. It says, or literally, offspring follows belly. You can't make this stuff up. The 19th century historian William Hennig inserted the Latin into the text. The original simply said in English that children would be slave or free according to the condition of the mother. That's because they knew they could rape the mother and force her to have their slave child. For Hennig, the Latin served to connect English slave law to Roman antecedents. See, they're telling you who they are. They're the Romans. They're the same people, right, who did evil in the past. By the way, that's why they hate the book of Clarence, because it's showing an image of a black Jesus, black apostles, black Israelites, black Jews, but white Romans doing evil in that movie because they did it in real life. It's not hate speech to tell the truth. This is what really happened. So anybody that might hear this video that's a Caucasian, understand this is your real history. If you don't like what I'm reading, then tell your people to reverse the remnant of these laws that you still have in the family court today. Right? Stop giving women power over men so they can destroy their family and then make them think that's female empowerment. Meanwhile, the households are broken and these boys are killing themselves in the street, being thugs and idiots. And then you say father absence is the problem. Well, no, the real problem is a legally racialized system of white supremacy and oppression that makes sure the father is not in the home. And this is the root of it here. Do you think the hearts of these people have changed? No, they passed this filth down to their children and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren who are the judges and attorneys right now in this wicked system. Let's continue. That it was only through Roman law that English slave owners claimed the right to children born into slavery, like cattle. They view our people like cattle. You think they view us differently today? No, they don't. That's why the police will kill you and say that they were afraid for their life. Meanwhile, if a police officer shoots a so-called white woman from Australia, look up the story of Muhammad Noor, right? He shot a white woman one time at night. She approached the car unannounced. He shot her one time. She died. They gave him 12 and a half years for homicide. Meanwhile, Philando Castile got shot in broad daylight 7 times in front of his wife and child, and he wasn't even driving the car. And they said Geronimo Yanez was innocent. You can't make this shiznit up. Get the hell out of here. So, the phrase thus becomes a disavowal for English theorists intent on distancing the nation from the precedent of slave ownership. But the language had more proximal reference in the case of heritable property. Thomas Aquinas writes, if a man sows on another's land, the produce belongs to the owner of the land. Now, the woman's womb in relation to the seed of man is like the land in relation to the sower. So this is their parable. This is their proverb they're giving now. The 13th century Spanish Saite Partidas, if I said that right, stipulated, slaves are considered more as commercial items than as people. This is what's going on today. Hence, property rights are acquired in the same way as they are with objects. Thus, he who is born of a slave mother is also a slave, even if his father is free. They took the power away from the father, and they've been doing it ever since. Right? If you look at Isaiah 3 and 12, it talks about how children, as for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. So you think you free, so-called black woman, because they're giving you some power over your man. No, they're planning your genocide, and your son is next. Understand that when you get through hating and killing his father, make sure you're ready for your son to die or go to jail next. Let's continue. Thus, he who is born of a slave mother is also a slave, even if his father is free. That's heavy. So the mother's owner also owns her child. Wow. Just as the sheep's owner also owns her lamb. Why are they using sheep and lamb? See? Whose flock are they referring to? God's flock, his people. Because they know who they got in captivity. Let's continue. This is the language that echoes in the 1662 Act. The language that evokes animal husbandry and property rights rooted in maternal descent through the bodies of African women. Now, there's an elder named Taj Tariq Bey who teaches about the Board of Education, I believe it was 1902, with Bill Gates' ancestors, and I believe Rockefeller had something to do with it as well. Basically, they stated that they want the educational system, the public educational system, to create a nation of workers, not thinkers. So that's why your public educational school won't teach you how to think. They want you to be a mindless zombie on an assembly line somewhere. They don't want you to think entrepreneurially, or at least to be self-employed or innovatively with inventions and so on and so forth, right? Well, that's called animal husbandry. That's why I brought that up, meaning you just work without thought. So, it says that the language that evokes animal husbandry and property rights rooted in maternal descent through the bodies of African women. They turn you into cattle, into animals, by giving your women rights over you, so-called black man. So, for the Negro man and woman, so-called black man and woman in the United States, we need to stop this role reversal and not do something just because it's legal and then blame each other when it doesn't work. I'm telling you, their legal system is for your demise. So you got to do what's righteous and just and equitable, not what you're allowed to do in their wicked courts of law. Let's continue. This is the slippage between the Southern European insistence on connecting slavery to animal husbandry and the discursive rhythms of 17th century English legislators' commitment to doing the same. It says here, Jerome Handler sees causality in the application of this legislative language from animals to humans. Quote, the transference of Partus Sequitur Ventrem from domestic animals to humans thus resulted in the characteristic of maternal transmission of slave status. You can't make this up. So if your mother is the one that's empowered, that means you're going to be a slave over here. So that means you need to empower fathers so they can be heads of the family like the Most High intended it. But this causes me to ask a different question, one organized around the relationship between women's experience, law, and the unthinking decisions that are the foundations on which hereditary racial slavery rests. Indeed, the presumption in Southern Europe had long been that Roman law prevailed in regard to the children born of enslaved women and free men. They're telling you they still using Roman law. Let's continue. Even so, there were important shifts in this idea that presaged the choice made by the legislators to evoke it in the 17th century Virginia. Judicial rulings blocking slave owners from selling children they'd reputedly fathered with enslaved women in their households began to emerge in the 14th century, alongside other practices designed to assimilate Slavic, Berber, Greek, and Muslim slaves into Europe. In other words, the child did not, in fact, always follow the condition of the mother. No, they did that over here in the United States. It wasn't like that at first. So I'm letting you know they made up a special law for you, so-called black man and woman in the United States. They especially wanted to destroy you. They made it worse over here, is what I'm saying. So the child over there did not, in fact, always follow the condition of the mother. Particularly, it was seen if that child was seen as assimilable. In the context of such broader shifts in practices of inheritance and slave labor in Europe, it is even more important to mark the ease with which European settlers turned to property law to bolster racialized barriers to freedom. In other words, they turned human beings into property, and then they applied property law to those enslaved human beings in order to bolster or increase the racialized barriers to freedom. You can't make this up. So I think I'm going to stop here. I was going to go in deeper into it, but I know a lot of people lack an attention span, and that is not meant to be an insult. It's just a fact. So I'm going to cut it off right here, and I might make a part 2 to this, because this document is 17 pages, and I'm only on page 5. But understand that slavery allowed the Caucasian man or the European man, the so-called white man, to have sex with a Negro or black or African woman, however you want to say it, get her pregnant. Look, even if she was married to a black man, talk to me. So he could commit adultery with another man's wife and not be put to death, not go to jail, get her pregnant, sell the child for a profit, or make the child his slave too. And they have the damn nerve to say that father absence is the problem in the black community today, as if they are not the ultimate deadbeats, sex traffickers, and slave traders throughout the history of this country. You can't make this stuff up.